Episode 66, Jordan Chariton. Jordan Chariton is a journalist. He's also one of the reasons I'm still as active as I am in the YouTube space. Jordan is the co-founder and head journalist for Status Coup News, an indie outlet dedicated to on-the-ground journalism. Status Coup has covered hundreds of protests all over the country. They covered the East Palestine chemical spill. They were the only outlet in the world to cover the UAW strike every single day. Jordan has been investigating the Flint water crisis for 9 years and counting. Recently, he published a book on the topic, and it's quite the bombshell. Full disclaimer, I'm a proud part of the operation over there. Please welcome to the show, Jordan Chariton. Jordan Chariton, how are you?
I'm doing wonderful.
So, where are you from? Is it... Like, I know it's New York area, but unless there's something I don't know.
I am from right outside New York City. Well, no, I'm from Long Island originally, and now I live right outside the city.
Mm-hmm. So you've basically been there. And then where was college for you?
The University of Tampa. So when I was going to college, Tampa was kind of trying to get better students, I guess. So they were given full or partial scholarships. So they gave me, I guess, like a B student, $10,000 a year. So when it kind of came down to with the scholarship, it would be the same price as going like to upstate New York, where the rest of my friends went to SUNY college, to Freeze, to a state school. So I said, I'll just go take a vacation for a couple of years in Florida. Mm-hmm. So I went to University of Tampa, and that's actually where I started, I guess, in media, because in college I worked at the local Fox station in Tampa.
So you weren't interested in journalism before college, or were you curious about it, or what was
I first kind of got into, I guess, politics and then journalism in 2004. I went to school and college, and a bunch of people were watching the debate between Kerry and Bush. So I was like, kind of, I guess, curious about politics, but I was never really diehard back then. And I watched the debate between Kerry and Bush, and I wasn't like overly impressed with Kerry, but George Bush just struck me as a particular idiot evil. Yeah. And that's when I started looking more into Iraq and getting more interested in the war. And I started in college. I was, as other people were out drinking or doing whatever. I mean, I was doing that plenty, but I was watching Keith Olbermann on MSNBC when he was actually good, right? Before he lost his mind. So I would say like 04, 05 is when I really started getting into politics. I was definitely back then more of like a, blue team good, Republicans bad.
Right.
And then when I graduated college in 2006, I started working at the local Fox station. And that wasn't really politics. Like, local news is just, if it bleeds, it leads. We're covering like murder, kidnapping. But I was working on the assignment desk, which is like the air traffic control of the news outlet. So that's where all the police sirens are going off and scanners. So I worked there nights and then overnight. So it started as an internship. Then I got a paid job there. After college, I tried to stay in Tampa because I was quite fond of, the sun and all that. But, the whole like graduating in 2008 with the economic collapse didn't help matters. Couldn't really get a job because there were no jobs. So I had a contact actually at Fox News. I didn't really know much about Fox News per se at that point. I would guess I was naive. I didn't know it was such a right-wing channel. I just said, hey, I need a job, and it's a news outlet, and it's in the city, so like I'll be in the city. So I started working at Fox News, and that was during the Obama 08 election. So my kind of political evolution went from like hating Bush to loving Obama, like a lot of us did back then. So I worked at Fox for a few years, and then
So how did you make peace with being at Fox while loving Obama?
it was
Did you
interesting.
just keep really quiet at the water cooler?
No, because actually I wasn't working on the TV side. I was working on the internet side.
Oh, okay.
So they had a show on during the '08 election called Strategy Room. And it was on their website. It was like a live, real time, like online show from like 9 to 5. And I was like the sole booker. I booked all the guests. I dealt with the hosts who were all like, thought their hour was like, prime time 60 minutes. It was a lot of work. I was booking like 40 guests a day.
Wow.
But it was also a lot of fun because it was, Fox News, the TV channel, they didn't give a shit about it. Like they just let us do whatever we want. So it was less like right wing on steroids because it was the web.
Gotcha.
I mean, the hosts were plenty right wing, but I booked, I guess what I thought were progressive guests, but they were really just, liberals at that point. It wasn't until I moved over to like Fox TV because I moved over to Fox Business. I was working on the judges show Freedom Watch, which was like libertarian power hour, and I was like, I got to get the hell out of there because by then I was like, my thoughts were becoming more defined. I was kind of starting to be like, you know what? I think Obama's kind of full of shit too. I wasn't fully like over to they're all corrupt, but I was getting there and working on like a libertarian show for Judge Andrew Napolitano. He was a nice guy, but he was, they were just drain government into the bathtub kind of people. So I didn't know if like maybe it's just Fox News and this right wing propaganda that's not for me. So I went over to MSNBC, which is like literally 2 blocks across the street from Fox. I worked there for a year, and that was also awful. So I just said I got to get out of working in mainstream media.
Which news outlet had the better snack facilities? Was it Fox or MSNBC?
I would say MSNBC because they're right in the 30 Rock building, where the Christmas tree is.
Yeah,
so you're like right in the heart of basically ground zero for capitalism in New York City, and like Rockefeller Center is one of those. So they had a lot of good stuff around there.
No, I would always, whenever I would do stuff at Sirius XM, which wasn't crazy often, but, typically when I'd go to New York City, I'd be doing something on, like one of the shows. And, you kind of go right by the Fox News building and all the other ones. Like they're all there in that cluster. And it's armed at the gills with security. And it's, it's always a sight to behold. So you were right in the thick of that for some years.
I was at MSNBC. I don't know how it is now, but at MSNBC, I was working in the newsroom, and the newsroom is right next to like the studio. So I could hear like Al Sharpton, fudging the human language off the teleprompter constantly. I could hear Rachel Maddow's show. I could hear Chris Matthews when he was there. And it just kind of made me numb, to be honest. Not even just because it was like, limousine liberal crap, but it just became like, I'm kind of a, fuck the echo chamber kind of person. And this was like it was basically like Sports Center for politics.
Sure.
The old Sports Center was literally a loop, like the same thing. It was just the same 2 stories over and over and over again, and not really substantive stories. I like my breaking point was like Rush Limbaugh. I think this was 2011 or 2012. He called like a Georgetown student a slut.
I remember
Sandra Fluke.
Yeah.
And they just went on for like 2 weeks about this. That I'm like, I'm sorry that he said this nasty thing about this woman, but like I think there's more important things. And this is kind of where like the alternative reality set in, because to get into MSNBC, it's Rockefeller Center, and you're just walking over homeless people. And I pitched my producer at MSNBC, like, I wasn't like I booked guests, but I said, can I go out and interview homeless people? Some of them might not want to, but some of them might, and get their stories. And I thought that would be interesting.
Did they laugh at you?
He actually did like that's admirable, like a pat on the back. That's really admirable. You want to do that, but and I quote, that won't rate. And it was at that moment I kind of realized, what this is, which is just kind of politics as a sporting event. Blue team versus red team.
Yeah, it's all just like catnip for whatever thing you hate. And it's just, it's so freaking lazy. And I would say back then it wasn't quite as ridiculous as it is now. I mean, you said like 2011. I mean, wasn't Rachel Maddow at least doing some okay stuff back then? Like that was before she got ridiculous, right?
To tell you the truth, the 2024 me would hate the 2012 me because I liked her back then because she started her show like every other outlet was covering the same thing, and she would start with like a 30-minute monologue on some weird story in Idaho. She was known for kind of covering a unique thing that no one else was covering, and she had like a research team of producers. She had the most staff, and it was like very meticulous and well produced and well researched, and it was like interesting stories that were not being covered elsewhere. Obviously, she shifted to basically, Russia, for breakfast, lunch, and dinner long after I left. But back then, I at least thought it was interesting because I was finding out a story I didn't know about. But they obviously changed their programming since I left.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, I think, part of it is one's political evolution because you and I are around the same age. But I think a big part of it with her in particular is she used to be a lot different. And I think some of the people who only know her from the past, 8 years, they're kind of really, and it's like, no, she used to be a lot. She used to be. I would occasionally make the joke of like, man, I used to describe Rachel Maddow as the diamond in the rough. Now, when I see a Rachel Maddow segment, I go, "Ooh, that was rough." So she's changed, but
I've seen that in my career, even not of like big time hosts, but just like people I've known that like became guests on Fox or MSNBC and became political pundits. And like I would talk to them in the green room because I book guests and I produce segments, and they would be, not hardcore progressive, but definitely closer to where we are now. Mm-hmm. But the more you kind of swim in that pool of elites, limousine liberals, or, elitist conservatives, you might start like Air America Rachel Maddow, who was like relatively kind of sort of progressive. I mean, Keith Olbermann long time ago was kind of sort of progressive on right. Some things. But the more you're in that kind of bubble, you become tribal yourself, and you care a lot less about, stories of the workers or, poverty or corruption. Definitely not corruption, because you kind of are indoctrinated into this Republicans bad, or Democrats bad, or you get into the horse race. And also, they're human. Their ratings go up when they treat politics as a sport. So. Totally.
And also I think for a lot of people, they want that ticket to the club. I mean, I've seen it. I haven't had the peeks under the hood quite the same way you have, but I've had, similar experiences. I mean, people really like that club membership. They don't want to forfeit it. And
I could tell you the Christmas party at 30 Rock when I was at MSNBC was wonderful. They had great booze, great hors d'oeuvres. It was nice. I mean, I was in my, whatever that was, early 20s. And I could see why people like that. Obviously, I didn't like it enough to stay in that world.
Well,
if I would have stayed in that world, I would have made a lot of money. Yeah.
Well, so let's move forward to there then. What made you not take the ticket to Easy Street?
For me, I don't know what it is. I didn't grow up as like, particularly poor. I wasn't wealthy, but I grew up kind of middle class. I didn't struggle for, I had a good life. My parents both worked, 24. My dad has worked, 6-7 days a week as long as I've been alive. I guess I was a jewelry store. So I think for me, I've just always kind of, I don't know, Shawshank Redemption's my favorite movie. Maybe that's something in my psychology. I've always kind of gravitated towards people being oppressed. I've always kind of gravitated towards corruption, against corruption. I was always kind of gravitated to stories and movies about crooks or, corrupt judges, or like, My Cousin Vinny, which wasn't particularly corrupt, but there were themes of corruption. So I don't really know what did it. Like, I didn't experience a particular injustice as a kid, but I always kind of just had a distaste for corruption. And after I left MSNBC, I kind of floated for a few years. I worked for a nonprofit in production. Then I took a massive pay cut to write full time. So I wrote at a couple of websites. I wrote at The Wrap, which is actually in LA. It's kind of like a knockoff of The Hollywood Reporter. And then actually 2015, true story, I had the flu. But my girlfriend at the time told me, like, oh, that show you watched, The Young Turks, I saw a poster that the host is, giving a talk at YouTube's office. And I wasn't like diehard into The Young Turks, but I had saw Jank fly off the handle after a mass shooting. And I really gravitated towards that. Like, I thought he was going to have a heart attack on air. He was just red-faced, cursing them all out. So I went, I had the flu, but I went anyway. And I went to a talk Jank was giving. I think I might have put powder on my face because my face was red. He probably doesn't know any of this because I was like sick. And I went up to him after I had talked to him. I had reached out to him for a story I was reporting on MSNBC to get a quote from him before that. So I started talking to him, and I basically told him, like, yeah, I'm just like stuck in this, this media echo chamber. I was writing for a few sites about the media, and I've just always wanted to report, on the ground, covering the stuff the media is not covering. So he told me that they, eventually wanted to dabble into, doing field reporting, and he'll keep me in mind. And I thought he was just kind of blowing smoke up my ass. So that must have been September or October. And then I got a call from him in December. So a few months after that, do you want to cover the Bernie-Hillary debate tomorrow in New Hampshire? And I said, what do you mean cover? What do you want me to do? He's like, I don't know, just go up there, talk to, campaign officials, talk to Bernie's people, Hillary's people, maybe some journalists in the room. So I still had a job at that point, but it felt like, oh, this is a once in a lifetime opportunity. So I went up to New Hampshire, and instead of doing what he told me, I decided to just go outside and freeze my ass off for a few hours and talk to Bernie people who were standing with their signs outside the debate hall. I talked to Hillary people too, and it was amazing. I mean, that was kind of my first experience on the ground where, Jank, he definitely has his, downsides, but also he did give me freedom to do it the way I wanted to do it. So I did like long form interviews with Bernie supporters outside, and it was really exhilarating. And then going to interview Hillary people, they weren't my cup of tea, but it was cool to you didn't see a lot of in cable news, actual like long form interviews with voters,
Right.
You just saw pundits and campaign officials. And then I went live on the Young Turks show, like from the debate hall, like in the press pen. And that was awesome. And I guess I did a good job because he offered me to cover the campaign for until November. He said, I can't commit past the election, but I could give you till the election. So I left my job, and the rest is history. I mean, I kind of floated 2016 from the Bernie Woodstock experience covering his rallies and to Trump rallies, which was a much different experience. And then, obviously I kind of I also ping ponged around. I went to Flint many times starting in 2016 and Standing Rock. So, Jank and TYT, I'm not the biggest fan now, but I will say then I would not be talking to you if I didn't get that opportunity.
Well, yeah, I mean, I have a very similar experience in the big scheme of things. I mean, if it wasn't for the Young Turks network, there's so many things that would not have happened in my life. And so it's a really hard line to walk because it just bums me out so much what it has become. But I mean, yeah, it's like I'm certainly thankful for the opportunities.
Yeah.
But boy, it really bums me out what it's become.
And it's unfortunate too. I think, I mean, it was unfortunate for me at the time, but I think more for the left, because we're up against such a Goliath, which is corporate media, which is diminishing, but it still has a lot of influence. And I used to get in fights with Cenk when I was there because they were investing all this money. Viewers were really investing all this money to send me around the country, Standing Rock and Flint and primaries. And it was a constant fight just to get my reporting on the main show. Mm-hmm. And I wasn't doing it like for my ego. I wanted more people to see what was going on in Flint, what was going on in Standing Rock. And I tried explaining to him, this would be good for your business to highlight that you're the only corporate and independent outlet, like, we're covering these things, not in a studio, but on the ground. And I think if they would have actually stuck with the on the ground reporting, even when I left, with, actual reporters and kept covering these things, I think they could have become a lot bigger. But, obviously they made quite different decisions.
Yeah, I'm not sure like what they did with with all the funding that was meant for reporters. I don't know like what, because it was just like, you were out the door, and then I know Michael Tracy was doing reporting, and then he was out the door. And
you want to hear a funny story? I don't think I've ever publicly said about that.
Yeah, man, go for it.
So Cenk, they did this fundraising campaign to hire more reporters. And he said, I quote, give me 10 more Jordan Charitons. And he raised a lot of money. Like, they raised $2 million in a few months. So I guess every $500,000 they raised, they were going to hire another reporter. So he called me like the day before Trump's inauguration. And he's like, hey, I have to hire another reporter. Do you know anyone good? And I'm like, I'll think about it and get back. He's like, no, I need to hire them like tomorrow and announce it on the show. I'm like, because I guess they hit their mark at that point. I think they had raised $1 million. The first one they hired was Nomiki Konst, and this was the second one. So I was like, I gave him a few names. I said, and I was very clear, I don't know if he does reporting, but I like this guy's tweets. He's talking about Michael Tracy. Mm-hmm. And this was a long time ago.
Yeah, he was different then, yeah.
Yeah. So I said, I gave him a couple names. I emphasized a few people that I thought might be actually good. Like, they were raw, but could become good reporters. And then I said, I like this guy's tweets. The next day, they announced Michael Tracy as the reporter on the show. So he contacts me the day before and then hires him, partially because I don't think
you
Cenk
like
knew
his
who
tweets.
He was.
Yes.
So that kind of tells you
or not, but I like his tweets.
That tells you the meticulous vetting process they had before they hired people.
That is awesome. That is an amazing story.
Yeah. No offense to Michael Tracy, but that's how I think that's how he got hired.
You vouch for those tweets. Yeah. That's wow. So, all right. So you're doing the thing at TYT, you leave TYT, and a bunch of other random people do too. And then is that around the time they got Dan Rather? Remember when that happened?
Yeah.
Remember when they were the cool indie outlet with their thumb on the pulse of the youth, getting Dan Rather.
Yeah. I mean, elephant in the room.
Respect to the guy, but like.
Well, elephant in the room. Obviously, I was fired from TYT. I don't need to relitigate the whole story. People know. So that was a tough time because, I had worked my ass off to get to that point, and I was growing an audience, and I was actually starting and a following. And I was starting to think at that time, this was like the fall of 2017, I was actually starting to think about going out on my own, willingly and starting my own outlet. And this was at a time there was a lot less of, there's a gazillion podcasts now and YouTube channels. Like back then there was other outlets, but not the, like what I call the digital diarrhea now.
We're going to talk more about that in a bit, but yeah.
Yeah. I was thinking about going out on my own. I was even reaching out to people, seeing who knew who in terms of maybe getting funding. And then, all that happened and, lies and accusations against me and, the rest, people know what happened. But yeah, it was a dark time for a couple of months. I also had to get back surgery. I had like serious back issue and back spasms down my whole leg. I had spasms in my hamstring, my calf, my whole left foot went numb by the beginning of 2018. Speaking of health insurance, because of this United Healthcare murder, the only way I still had my health insurance is I was paying Cobra to keep my insurance from TYT. So I was one of the lucky ones. My parents were helping me. Most people don't have that. So I was paying whatever it was, $600 a month for Cobra just to keep my insurance from the Young Turks. Without that, I would not have been able to get surgery, and I probably would have lost feeling in my foot, because they said if you don't get surgery now, my whole left foot was numb because a piece of my disc had broken off and was stuck in my spinal cavity.
Oh, wow.
Which in part was because I was on the road for TYT for 2 years, and Standing Rock in particular, I slipped several times on ice. I'm not blaming TYT, but that's part of why my back hit. Anyway, so yeah, I mean, it was just kind of like a blessing in disguise. It was a tough experience getting fired and being smeared, but it kind of forced me to start this Status Coup. It was not an ideal time to start it because YouTube had just changed its algorithm, for people who remember that. So YouTube basically changed its algorithm to elevate CNN and bury independent outlets. So I started, and the things I was doing at TYT that were working incredibly well, and I grew a channel for them very quickly to 140,000 subscribers, was not working because YouTube was basically hiding my channel. But yeah, it was very strange to see TYT going from forget me, but just on the ground stuff to Dan Rather and some of the reporters they hired who, were definitely not who I would have hired with the audience's money.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So tell me about the kind of origin, how did it kind of get to Status Coup? Because you had batted around a few other things prior to Status Coup, right?
Yeah. I had a nonprofit, terribly named Truth Against the Machine, where I was very naive. I thought I could just take activists off the street and make them journalists. Do not try that at home. No disrespect to activists, but most of the time activists are activists for a reason, and it's hard to morph them into journalism, which you can't be an activist and a journalist at the same time. But yeah, I mean, I just thought to myself, you know what? The biggest, a lot of companies and outlets spend a lot of money on market research, right? To see where there's demand for a specific product. Well, I just had a year and a half of the best market research you could ever have, which was being on the ground. I interviewed probably 1,000 to 2,000 people across the spectrum, the left, the right, Bernie people, Trump people. I was in Flint. I did interviews in trailer parks on certain stories, Standing Rock. And I knew there was an incredible hunger for actual on the ground reporting. Real reporting, not just going to a mass shooting or where something breaks, but actually covering things that are not breaking, but are actually broken, meaning,
right.
Flint, staying on it, going to interview, doing interviewing homeless people, which I did in Seattle because Amazon was making it unaffordable. So there was real hunger for on the ground reporting. The challenge was just how do I reach eyeballs, because I didn't have TYT's platform anymore. I already mentioned, the suppression, and it takes a lot of money. It takes a lot of money to afford to travel. I mean, in the beginning, we had a small investor for $50,000, and that money went out the door, on equipment and bringing on my cameraman at the time. So in the beginning, I was paying Colin, our editor, out of my savings, which I didn't have much of. I was paying Jen at the time for a short while, my former partner, out of my savings. And we did a GoFundMe, which fortunately we raised a good amount of money, but we were spending it in real time, to go to Flint and to do a documentary and all these things. So it was touch and go for a while. I mean, there was definitely a lot of times in the beginning and the middle where I was like, I don't really know how much longer we could do this, because a lot of the, some of the trips you lose money on, meaning an average trip to go anywhere for 4 or 5 days with myself, a cameraman. Some trips it was me, a cameraman, and Jen. It's like $4 or $5 grand between flights, hotels. You were on the road for us, so food. And unless you're growing, X amount of paid member signups, or something goes viral, you're losing money. And after a while, if you're losing more money than you're growing, you're going to go belly up. But we kind of just did it from like the, scratching pennies together and GoFundMe. The GoFundMe allowed us to travel and cover more things. And then we're on the ground. We were getting more member signups. So it's definitely it has not been steady. It's been kind of like a roller coaster. And there's been some peaks where one story hits and we get like, on one trip, we'll get like 75 to 100 paid members and more YouTube subscribers. And some trips, I'll be on the ground and we've spent like $4 grand and gotten like 5 members to sign up. Mm-hmm. So it's been tough. And there's been times just for my own health, I've thought like, I don't know how much longer I could do this, because for people watching, if you have your own thing, I mean, you are doing the job of 4 to 5 people, and you're working around the clock. I mean, my paternity leave when my daughter was born was writing a book, because I didn't have the time when I was working Status Coup full time to also write a book. And weekends, a lot of the time was me working on stories or on the phone with sources or digging through documents, for an investigative story. So it's been kind of, it's been a lot. It's been, hard to have a work-life balance, but fortunately, as we speak, we're in kind of one of those peaks on the roller coaster. We've grown quite a bit recently. So yeah, I mean, there's definitely downsides, but overall, you can't, in this media landscape, in the way this country works, which is corporate media, and even independent media, there's not a lot of outlets today that I would even want to work for. There's no substitute for being liberated and having your own thing.
Totally. Well, I want to get into Flint here in just a minute, but first, I do, whenever I interview somebody who, has like the indie media, for lack of a better framing, whenever we have that in common, I always kind of, go over the same theme, because, as somebody who has been a fly on the wall for many years, then a participant for some years, and I'm old enough to have seen it gone from this obscure thing that only a couple people knew about to an actual contender in the media landscape. I feel really just bummed out about the way it has all gone down. And I think that, and I'm not saying that, any one person's the culprit or anything like that, or that I'm the solution or anything. I'm not saying any of that. Like this is like an all-inclusive but I just feel like the space as a whole has just done more harm than good. It has not really contributed much for the cause of change. And it's just very disappointing. I mean, one of the reasons I said yes to you was because you're running an organization the way I think it should be run, like focusing on the ground stuff, focusing on, filling in those gaps that the corporate media just purposely fails at. And the fact that that's the exception and not the rule, and we all, we know why. It's a lot easier to just opine to a webcam than it is to, go on the ground. I get it, but I still have this, like, I really wish we'd be in a different place in 2024, thinking about where it was in 2004. What are your thoughts on that? Would you agree with that? Am I being too neg?
No, I don't think so at all. I actually could be more negative. Sure. Yeah, I mean, listen, I think that you don't have to, speaking about independent outlets, there's no shame in being a studio show. Democracy Now! Is in a studio. They don't really go out on the ground that much.
Sure.
But I do think the independent media infrastructure, the fact that 95% of it is really kind of hot takes, reacting to kind of news of the day. Yes, they're doing it in a different way, but they're also just kind of covering the same things collectively, and they're not really covering anything unique. They're not really searching for new stories. They're not really, doing any investigative stuff. It doesn't mean you have to be a capital R reporter and like go out on the ground. It's not for everyone. But for example, over the weekend, I found a whistleblower who used to work for United Healthcare. She did a YouTube video. I watched her video over the weekend, and I found her contact, and I reached out to her. She saying, would you do an interview with me? She wanted to talk to me on the phone first, kind of see what I was about. I talked to her for like 15 minutes. She agreed. That's not like hardcore investigative reporting, but it's kind of making the effort to, reach, I scour, looking for new angles, new people to interview, and, talking to them first and then interviewing them. And from that interview, she revealed that they had a quota system, where employees had a certain amount of claims they had to deny. So anyone at TYT could do that. Anyone at any of these commentary outlets could do that. You don't even have to leave your studio.
Right.
You could scour Reddit threads. I do that too, where people tell horror stories, and then I reach out to them and be like, hey, I found your story really compelling. I'd love to interview you for my show. 9 out of 10 times they don't respond, but one out of 10 they do, and it's really powerful. So there's ways that independent outlets could do that kind of stuff. Yeah, it's the same thing. Workers being exploited. A lot of my stories have come from I find it on Reddit or somebody emails me. But most of the independent outlets are just kind of like reacting to stupid corporate media clips or, cringe things like Democrat A did or Republican. And there's space for that.
What each other is tweeting.
Right. There's plenty of space for that. But why aren't we doing all the other things? And more importantly, why isn't independent media elevating the only independent outlet doing on-the-ground reporting? I mean, this isn't for my ego, but flat out, I can't get on Democracy Now! For some reason. I don't know if I killed somebody's cat. I mean, I tried to get on their show for my book because Amy Goodman was one of the first people that went on the ground in Flint.
Yeah.
They wouldn't have me.
Really?
They didn't say no. They just didn't. We're looking, and then they don't respond, and I follow up, and it's kind of just kill them with kindness. But I've broken stories on Flint, in The Guardian, in The Intercept, Democracy Now! For some reason wouldn't have me on. It's been pulling teeth in a lot of cases to get certain independent outlets, even to retweet your stuff, your on the ground stuff. And I'm not, people are busy and this and that, but at a certain point, it would be good for them to have something original to then offer commentary on. It would be good for their channels to, hey, look at this story on the ground in East Palestine, or, I did reporting trips during COVID, interviewing people about to be evicted, interviewing homeless people. That could be discussed on some of these shows. So, sometimes it just, you kind of, you have to scratch your head a bit, because you wonder, the independent outlets say the very stuff I'm doing is what they care about, but then they don't want to cover it. So, there's incentives for all of us, corporate and independent, and a lot of independent folks, and some of them you might know, it's definitely, it's an attractive thing when certain things you're doing, you're getting, thousands of live viewers, or a certain topic is blowing up. You want to stick to that. For example, right now I've been covering the United Healthcare murder and Luigi Mangione, and it's blowing up for us. But I actually would be covering this topic whether it's blowing up or not. That's the difference. Flint, trust me, when I do videos on Flint, they don't do well. It's just YouTube's algorithm is allergic to it. I'm going on my 9th year covering this. Some things you just cover and champion, and you'll probably lose money from it, but it's just the right thing to do. And I don't think that is embedded in independent media. I think it's become a lot of hot take stuff. And unfortunately, we have people in independent media. It doesn't make them bad people, but have kind of become glorified shock jocks, like radio shock jocks on the internet.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And they're more interested in kind of growing their following and hearing their own voice than changing things. And I think that's unfortunate. I think we need a lot more on the ground reporting, even if it's not what I do. It doesn't necessarily, it's expensive. So even if you can't afford to go on the ground all across the country, there's if you're a commentator in LA, there's plenty of stuff you could locally go on the ground and cover and connect it to broader national themes. Same thing in Chicago, all over the country. There's things you could cover on the ground or investigate where you are. And the people are hungry for it. Unfortunately, there's just not a lot of people doing it.
So let's go to Flint then. You started going 9 years ago. You started with the Young Turks. Give people who may not know kind of a snapshot of what you have learned in those 9 years.
Boy. Yeah. First time I went there was July 2016. So this was half a year after all the cameras had left. Rachel Maddow had done like a big town hall there 6 months earlier.
Obama drank the water. This is after all that stuff. And apparently their water was okay now.
Right. And, I was kind of naive, just like everyone else. I just assumed that the government was doing something about it. And the first time I went there, it was just a real earthquake for me. Like, it was just a shock for me. I'd never seen anything like it. I mean, we were driving and porch after front porch, you're seeing stacks of bottled water up to the ceiling. And a few homes I went in, you're seeing just like dishwashers broken and laundry machines broken and water coming through, like mold coming from the wall from the water. And the machines were broken because the water was corrosive and contaminated. I was meeting kids with full body rashes, and one guy who's unfortunately no longer with us had plastic bags filled with his hair that had fallen out. And I was meeting people who were losing teeth. And it was just shocking to me because it was not being covered at all. At that point, you're talking summer 2016. It was, Trump, Hillary. And to his credit, I said to Cenk, like, this is, to me, the biggest story I've ever covered. At first, I wanted to kind of cover the human suffering and the human interest part. But pretty quickly, I mean, residents were just dumping on my lap. That's the value of going on the ground. You will not have a shortage of things to investigate. They were dumping on my lap corruption. And I was quickly learning the who, what, when, and why of how this city was poisoned. And it was not what the media had told us. And it was not what the government had told us. And I was overwhelmed, to be honest with you, because this was not like something that just happened like in 6 months. There was a long road that caused this. So it was overwhelming because every time I thought I had kind of like, cracked it and figured it out, there's just a whole another couple layers under the onion. So, to Cenk's credit, he allowed me to keep going back. And every time I went back, it was just more and more like alternative reality. Like, I'm seeing a poisoned community, people really sick. They're being gaslit. They're being sent pamphlets by the government that everything's grand. Meanwhile, they're growing sicker and sicker. The media is not covering it. And that's when I started to build more sources and, obtain documents that exposed a lot of the corruption that caused it. And that's kind of, I would say, in 2017, where Cenk and I kind of started to butt heads a little bit because he wanted me to start covering other things more, which I understood. But at the same time, I said, like, you're saying you want to expand investigative reporting, but investigative reporting, you can't just parachute in and like break a big story. Like you have to like there was one case where a source, an important source wanted to provide me information, but they wanted to meet with me. And Cenk said to me, well, can't you just talk over the phone? It's like, do you think like, Edward Snowden was just going to fax Glenn Greenwald the documents? No,
yeah.
So anyway, he was getting, I don't think he was seeing enough bang for his buck, so to speak, in terms of clicks and this and that. And I was trying to explain to him like, right, but this is about your brand and you could grow your paid membership off of this because we're the only ones covering it. So anyway, Yeah, it was just very eye-opening, and I realized that a lot of people thought wrongly that this was just about water. But the more I went there, the more I kept covering it, the more stories I broke. First for Vice, and then The Guardian, and a couple other places. It was very clear to me that this is like the biggest government cover-up of the 21st century. Frankly, it makes Watergate look like nothing. I actually wanted to name my book The Real Watergate. They wouldn't do it. But actually, story about the media and how corrupt they are. So in 2018, my partner and I, former partner Jen, we had knocked on over 400 doors in Flint because I had sources telling me that the governor's environmental department was cheating on the water testing. They were flushing residents' water right before putting the sample bottle under, and you're just going to flush out the lead, and then voila, there's no lead because you've already flushed it out before putting the sample bottle under. So anyway, I got 35 residents on the record that the government had cheated on their tests. Newsweek magazine said yes to doing it, which would have been a huge break for Flint and Status Coup to get this published in Newsweek magazine. We went down there, we met with them, we explained the story, we showed all our documentation, all that. And then I fly to Flint because the story is supposed to break that week, and right before the midterm elections, and they killed the story. Claiming this is really good, but we don't think there's enough data. And like, not enough data. When's the last time anyone at Newsweek knocked on 4 doors, let alone 400? We have 35 residents on the record. I have documents supporting this. Anyway, so I don't know the true reason they killed it, but there was times when that happened where a story that I got an outlet to agree to killed it. There was also just part of the biggest struggle with my Flint reporting has been after I get the goods, after I break the story, after I get the documents, after I build the sources, and I have a big story. Fuck if I could get an outlet to publish it. I mean, I could write a whole book just on the insane excuses and rationalizations I've gotten from media outlets why they pass.
So then what led you to wanting to do the book then? Like, what led you to the book has to be next?
I just think that I had published a couple investigative stories about the cover-up, in The Guardian and a couple other places, but the timing sucked for each one of them. Like my first story for Vice, which exposed that the governor was sending his henchmen, his top advisor around to offer payoffs to keep sick residents quiet. We published that like literally when COVID broke internationally. So it might as well be like it didn't see the light of day. It got completely buried, understandably so, because everyone was focused on COVID. Story I broke for The Intercept on I got the governor's phone calls with his chief of staff, his health director, showing that they were covering up the deadly Legionnaires outbreak. We broke that like literally right after January 6th, right before Biden's inauguration. So that's all anyone was focused on. So I felt like I had broken stories, but they hadn't really gotten a lot of attention because of big news events, and also because it was very hard to get attention on this because the media's brain broke and it was always Trump 24/7. But I just had like all this information and all this bombshell reporting, which I thought was major. We're talking about a community being poisoned, the government covering it up, along with a Wall Street bank involved, and then them just leaving the residents to slowly die. I just thought, I have all this. Some of it's out there, but most of it isn't. And if I'm never going to accomplish anything in my life, I just want to get this down to paper and out to the public. It might not change anything fundamentally, but I couldn't live with myself if like I just had all this piecemeal, and in a story here, but I hadn't really put it all together. So I just said to myself, and I had feedback from some editors that I pitched out stories to that like, this is great, but it's too long for like our outlet. Like this would be better as a book, which was decent feedback. So that's kind of what gave me the incentive to do it. So the writing it part was quick, was not hard because I had all the information already. Making it blending the investigative part with the human suffering part was harder, because this story has so many facts that you could kind of not bore people, but like it's heavy. The facts and the characters and who, what, when, and why is heavy. So I had to kind of weave in the human stories and the sitting on front porches with kids who were, could no longer count to 10, or forgot letters of the alphabet, or the mother who wanted to call Child Protective Services on herself to get water. So it's kind of hard to like weave in the facts with that. But I managed to do it. Then it was hard to find a publisher because, shocker, the major publishers don't really care about Flint. or as one put it, I don't think this is commercially viable, i.e. people won't care. But fortunately, I actually, after 6 months of just cold pitching publishers and getting nowhere, I, by dumb luck, was connected with a book agent. This guy was from Flint, so he cared. And pretty quickly he found the publisher that I ended up publishing it with. So,
well, in closing, tell people where they can go to learn more about you, and tell people where they can go to get the book.
Thank you, sir. Definitely, if you don't know, check out Status Coup on YouTube. I believe we are one of the only independent outlets that leaves the studio from time to time. Yours truly, Ron Placone, has been on the ground for us. He was at the UAW strikes he covered for us in Michigan. So check us out on YouTube, Status Coup, COUP. And the book, I don't know if it's in stores right now, but you can definitely get it online. It's in some stores, but it's kind of a needle in a haystack in stores. So you could get it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. It's called We the Poisoned, Exposing the Flint Water Cover-Up. And if you like listening to books, it's on Audible and the other big audio platforms. And definitely... Have I read it? Yeah.
No. Oh, no. I meant the audiobook. Do you read the audiobook?
No. It was an uphill climb to get the publisher to turn it into an audiobook. But once I got them to agree, they got someone else, I guess, whoever they have, do their narration. So he did a decent job. But yeah, I would say, honestly, I'm not even making much, if anything, from this book. But I want as many people to get this as possible, because it's not just about Flint. Like, if you read this book, trust me, your takeaway will be, this is much deeper than Flint. We have a really, really corrupt government that is creating corporate sacrifice zones. And to prevent Flint from happening elsewhere, you have to actually know what really happened in Flint. So I hope, if you can get it, it's called We the Poisoned.
Thanks so much for doing this, Jordan.
Thank you, kind sir. Appreciate it.
That was Jordan Chariton. Be sure to check out Status Coup. I'm biased. I'm a contributor over there. And check out his book, We the Poisoned. It is mind-blowing. Trust me on that one. Music for the 1000 Podcast is provided by Andrew Saxonov. Be sure to check out his podcast, the Baywatching Podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. Leave us a 5-star review, would you? And if you want to support this show on the sustainability end, you can do so over at patreon.com/Ron Placone. For a Give What You Can level, you get all kinds of exclusive content. You get full stand-up clips not available anywhere else. You get insider info on upcoming films and productions, and you get the 1,000 episodes before they're out to the public, and that's all for a Give What You Can level. And we do Zoom Hangouts, so we've got a really cool community going over there, which, speaking of which, I want to say thank you to everyone who came out to the show on the 15th. We had an amazing time. It was sold out, so Los Angeles, thank you so much for showing up. And we premiered part 1 of Termination Fee, and it was so awesome to see that come to life for you. And I'm so excited about that project. And thank you to everyone who came out to the show, and to anyone who's come out to a live show ever, and to anyone who's listened to this podcast. I know, 'tis the season, right? Thank you. It means the world and then some. We'll see you next week. Peace. Hey guys, Ron Placone here. Take your own 1,000 challenge. No, you don't need to interview 1,000 people, although if you want to do that, go for it. Your 1,000 challenge can be whatever you want. Maybe you want to call a friend out of the blue once a week. Maybe you want to read a book every month. Maybe you want to start a different garden every season. I guess that might be dependent on where you live. Look, the point of the challenge is taking on an endeavor that enriches your life in some way, and it can be measured. And then, of course, you do it regularly. That's what 1000 is doing for me and hopefully for you too. The main reason for this podcast and every podcast I've ever done is to build community. So take your own challenge. Then join our Facebook group. It's called 1000 What's Your Challenge? ? That's 1000 What's Your Challenge ? And post about what your 1000 challenge is and the progress you're making. All I ask is that people be encouraging of each other's challenges. This is personal and vulnerable, so be cool. There's enough negativity on social media. We don't need to add to it. For those of you who aren't on Facebook, hopefully in the future we'll be expanding to places like Discord, Reddit, but for now, we're starting on Facebook. And again, that Facebook group is called 1000 What's Your Challenge? See you there.